tree of good gifts and giver of life, come and abide in us, and cleanse us of all impurity, and save our souls, O good Lord.
So are you ready, Elena? Saint
Well,
Dimitri.
I've got a very short one.
Good.
I thought it's not to make you bored. I don't know if it looks like it covers
Just
Go ahead.
Go with it,
the
we'll
main
talk.
things.
All right.
We'll,
Or
we'll,
maybe you have
And-
more.
I have more if need be.
And I deleted the picture.
Yeah.
the picture.
Yeah, I've got a few of them, a few pictures of him.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Well, I was saving the printer
There you go.
because I always print and just said, I just put a new printer.
Yeah. Here are some
Cartridge.
pictures of Saint Demetrius.
Okay,
There's some more.
it's the Rostov, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, and the reason why I picked him because the Rostov is the close where I born. So basically my God.
Oh,
Okay, our father among the saints, Dimitri of Rostov, also Dimitri, Dimitrus, Demetrius,
Different ways of saying the name.
was a great 17th century hierarch, preacher, author, and ascetic.
Ascetic.
Ascetic. Please correct me if I
Mm-hmm.
do something wrong. He was born near Kiev in the year of 1651 and reposed in the year 1709. Among his many glorious works of instruction, he was known especially for his translation and publication of the lives of the saints. He foresaw his own death 3 days in advance and died while at prayer. Dmitri was a great light of the Russian Church and the Orthodoxy in general. He had heavenly vision during his life. He served the Lord zealously, thank you, and took up his habitation in the kingdom of heaven. Saint Dimitri also composed a service to the 9 martyrs of Cyzicus,
Sisyphus.
in which he wrote, through the intercession of these saints, abundant grace was given to dispel fevers and trembling sicknesses. Saint Dimitri also described the sufferings of the holy martyrs and wrote the sermon for their feast day. His life is celebrated on October 28th, but on September 21, the church commemorates the finding of his miracle working relics in 1752. This is what I don't understand, why they do,
They moved the relics.
yeah.
We'll talk about that
Oh,
as soon as you
okay.
finish.
And now about his life. Bishop Demetrius Daniel Tuktalo in the world was born into a Kazakh family in 1651 in the village of Makarova in the Kiev region. He enrolled in the Kiev Academy, but had to give up his studies because of war and finished his education studying by himself. After taking monastic vows at one of the Chernigov monasteries, he caught the attention of Archbishop Lazarus Baranovich, who directed him to preach in his cathedral. During the next 2 years, Saint Dimitri preached frequently and soon became so famous for his eloquence that churches in Lithuania and Malorossia, which is Ukraine, completed with one another in letting him come and preach. Saint Dimitri was 33 years old when he started his mortal 12-volume work.
The Chittemenier,
Monthly readings.
the monthly lives.
Yeah, that word. Which describe the life of saints for every day of the year. For 20 years, from 1684 to 1704, he diligently collected, studied, and compiled these lives of saints. The work was nearly complete by the time he became Metropolitan of Rostov in 1702, and quickly ranked among the favorite reading of Russian Orthodox believers. After being elevated to the rank of Metropolitan, he undertook a struggle against schism in the church and wrote a detailed study about major schismatic sects under the life of investigation of the Bryansk Old Believer faith. 7 years of his pastoral service in Rostov were filled with his labors aimed at strengthening the faithful. He visited every corner of his diocese, teaching and preaching to the people. Painfully aware of the ignorance of both his parishioners and priests, he sponsored and organized a school in Rostov and cared for the students there with fatherly love and attention. They would often gather around him and sing spiritual hymns composed by him. Many of these sublime hymns of Bishop Dimitri were sung by people in pre-revolutionary Russia. Saint Dimitri led an ascetic life of prayer, very strict fasting, and kindness. His food was simple and always very meager. He was accessible to everyone, always benevolent and
Lenient.
On the 28th of October 1709, this great devotee of learning and piety gave his soul to the Lord. Peacefully during his prayer in private, he was discovered on his knees before an icon on the Savior. In 1752, his relics were found to be incorrupt and he was ranked among the saints. in addition to the Old Believer Faith, Bishop Dimitri wrote a number of sermons and instructions, such as a short catechism, a history of the Tsars and patriarchs, a record of Russian metropolitans, and other writings. A short confession before one's spiritual father is used to this day in many parishes. As a help in the sacrament of confession, all the works of Bishop Dimitri are permitted with deep faith and warmth, and are easy to read, since the Russian language is published to a wonderful
Legibility.
and refinement. He was a truly great national writer and our father among the saints.
So the first thing you brought up, the translation of the relics being established as a separate feast. It says here that when you died, he was buried, and then some years later, 40 years later, thereabouts, they opened up his tomb and saw that his relics were incorrupt. I'm not sure if it was at that time or another time. Then they moved his remains to a more prominent place. And so that would be the translation of the relics. They're moving the relics. The translation means the moving of the relics. This often happens with saints. And it's also after that they begin to divide up the relics to give to different parishes and bishops and so forth. So you, like with St. Barb, I think they were saying that.
In several places.
Yeah, they're in several places. And essentially, anytime you have a public church festival related to that saint, it can become a secondary feast of the saint. The other thing that would be cause of creating additional feasts would be some miracle work by him. Like there's a feast of Saint Archangel Michael who diverted a river and created a spring of holy water, and that becomes a feast. The protection of the Mother of God is one of the more prominent feasts where it's because of some action. In the 9th century, Constantinople was being attacked, and people prayed to the Mother of God, and she, it was on the 1st of October, and there was a vision of her holding her veil, and they did a procession around the city walls, and the attack was cut short. So that had become a feast. And things like that are the reasons for these additional feasts. In our own case, with St. Joseph of Petersburg, when the ROKOR glorified the new martyrs of Russia in 1981, the Soviet archives were not available to anybody. And it was believed that he had been martyred on the 15th of December on the church calendar. So that was established as his individual feast. The new martyrs had a feast that's joint, but then a number of the more prominent new martyrs were also set up in a separate feast that was typically the Day of the Dead. In the late 80s and 90s, when archives were opened up, the KGB records indicated that he had been shot on November 7th, the 20th of the Civil War, which is why we now have our main feast on the 7th, 20th of November. But we have a secondary feast because it was appointed by the ROKOR Council of Bishops on the 15th, 20th of December. So we now have two feasts plus the new martyrs feast. That was done by an error. Well, no, not really. It was done by the grace of God. So that's how feasts get established. There is in particularly his death, some parallels to St. John Shanghai in San Francisco. Yeah, St. Dimitri died before an icon of the Savior, Christ. St. John of Shanghai in San Francisco died on his knees, praying before the push through the icon of their Elvis. It was, that struck me. Another thought that I had in my notes. What did I leave with my notes? No, that's not it. I was just jotting them down, sitting here, and now I lost them. Oh, no, that's not it. I'm not sure what I did with them. There was a little tab like that I was writing on. Ah, it is. It's this one. It's on the back. He, as a young man, came to the notice of the Archbishop, Saint of the Life, and the Archbishop, after he'd had some training, had him become a preacher. Anybody notice that in the life? Anybody want to comment on that?
The specific title, preacher?
Well, no, he was preaching sermons in church.
The bishop specifically told him to, but all bishops and rectors.
Oh, right, is preach.
Right.
The bishop must have thought he was especially gifted.
Yes. You don't see it done a whole lot today, particularly in America, where the Orthodox are few and far between. But in Greece and in Russia, particularly in previous centuries, there were a variety of people who had not been ordained anything. Some of them had been, there's a couple of cases I think where maybe the guy's a deacon, he's been ordained a deacon, but he hasn't been ordained a priest. And they're able to give good explanations of the faith to the faithful. And also there's a lot of people who are illiterate, so that they're not able to read on their own. So preaching is an important task. And the bishops would, from time to time, bless somebody to do that. In fact, there is a...
So this was before you became a priest?
Yes. There is a rank in the lesser orders of preacher.
Really?
Yeah. Just like there's reader,
Reader.
subdeacon, those are the ones that were ordained, but there's a laying on of hands for somebody to be made a preacher. And he was one of these people for whom this was done. I don't remember what the state of Rostov was in his lifetime, but it's not Moscow, and you don't have the intelligentsia there necessarily. Plus, they're fighting off the Latins, because the Poles were active still at this point, although they were in decline, the Poles were in decline. And so there's this conflict between Roman Catholicism, where the Poles are trying to make everybody, all the Slavs, Roman Catholic, and the Russians are basically saying, no, let's be Orthodox. And so they were looking for people who could explain the faith to the laity. And so he was a preacher for that.
Do they still have an office like that in the church?
It's just not used much because you have to have people who are well grounded in the faith and who can give good and compelling explanations of the faith to simple people.
Her report said that parishes were competing to have him come there. He must have been
Yeah.
good.
And then another Chrysostom.
The Golden Mouse.
Right. Of course, the well, it wasn't his only work, but it was probably the best known work of his that we have today, that we continue to use, of the Lives of the Saints. They're being translated into English. And I think, Monisha, you read out of,
So the life she read from was written was him.
yes, and it was translated into English. How long did it take him to compile the Lives of Saints?
Years, I guess,
How many?
Didn't it say something, 20 or something?
20 years
20 years.
he was working on it. And there's a rather interesting account. No, this is, let's see, what's it?
So what languages he was?
He was writing in Slavonic or Russian,
Was it Russian or something?
But they said translating.
translated into English.
So
The
he
lives
knew
of, his The Lives of the Saints is written in Slavonic.
Someone else translated it.
And then there's, no, I forget who's doing the translation into English.
Father Thomas Moret.
Father Thomas Moretta. He's been working on that for several years too.
But he's not done.
But no new volumes come out. for a
Right.
long time.
So, and then the other piece that there was talking about with him was his short, he had a short catechism, and this was done, he wrote this for the benefit of the people who were being indoctrinated
By the
or
Poles.
by the Poles, to have short explanations of Orthodox Christian doctrines. And we have use of these, we don't have specifically his, we have the same need today where this world, this society is pushing everybody to abandon orthodoxy and adopt a worldly opinion. The other one that he's wrote, and I've come across this, is the short confession before one's spiritual father. I've seen it both in Russian and in English, and it's been a couple parishes, Seattle Cathedral and then St. John's in San Francisco. There were a number of people who were using that for their confessions. The confession is fairly generic. It's also fairly short, maybe half a page like this, and it will go through the various sins that one can commit. Like, I've been angry, I've committed murder in my heart, that kind of thing. It's not specific to whatever specific instance of a sin you were thinking about, but it is a good way to categorize your sins. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people just leave it at that; they just rattle it off.
Just read it.
And that has value, but it's not as good a confession as if you've examined your conscience. Because what I've found with confession is that for the most part, people will have one or two or maybe three things that they continue to struggle with in their lives. They have a tendency to commit specific sins. And they're struggling with those. And so what I try to get people to do is to focus on those and think about them. Think about the circumstances in which they're tempted, and think about the ways in which they can resist those temptations, and then confess it. And so what I would like is for people to go beyond just rattling off a list of these, the 10 commandments. I've committed these sins against the 3rd, 5th, and 6th commandments.
It might be helpful then as a way of.
It's helpful
of
to look at, help
stimulating
you
your
remember
memory.
some of
Right.
your sins. You could,
Yeah,
oh
and-
yeah, there's that one.
And that is
Yeah.
useful, as I said,
Yeah.
for that purpose, but then take it beyond that.
Right.
And what's troubling you,
Mhm.
okay? So, why is he called Metropolitan?
He was made metropolitan. That's all.
How did that happen?
Because they didn't have a patriarch in those days.
Is that true?
Is that true?
In
17.
the end of this 17th century and the beginning of the 18th century, they had a patriarch.
Oh,
Metropolitans were beneath the patriarch.
Correct. Now, we've been reading the lives of the Moscow hierarchs, and we've come across a couple who had the title of patriarch, and we've come across one or two that were metropolitans.
Right.
Prior to 1580 something, I forget the exact year, when Constantinople elevated the Moscow See to patriarchate, the first hierarch of the Russian Orthodox Church had the rank of metropolitan. And this is one of the reasons why in the Russian Church, metropolitans will outrank archbishops, whereas in the Greek Church, the reverse is true. When there was one metropolitan, but then you have significant sees like Kiev, after the metropolitan had moved, or Novgorod, those bishops were elevated to the rank of archbishop.
Was Rostov a big place?
Well, by the end of the 18th century, the 17th century, yes. Plus, when you have
Not
a,
anymore,
when you have a, well, it was a significant enough city that it would
at the time.
warrant a metropolitan. When you have a patriarch, then you can have multiple metropolitans, and in fact, that's what they did.
Right.
Moscow was the patriarchate, Novgorod was a metropolitan, Kiev was a metropolitan, Rostov was a metropolitan, and so on. They had a number of metropolitans. So he was made a metropolitan at some point. It doesn't exactly say how many years he'd been bishop before he was made metropolitan. A little bit of history on Russian Orthodox hierarchy. Okay. Saint Tikhon
Speaking
of
of
the
Russian
Dons.
hierarchy.
Alrighty then. So, St. Tikhon, Bishop of Rodnej, one member of the Dons. Rodnej.
Close enough.
Maybe you could tell us, how do you pronounce it? Rodnej?
Voronezh.
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 Voronezh. There you go.
Okay.
Okay.
St. Tikhon
Here's
of the
what I
Dons,
found to him.
Bishop of Voronezh. In the world, Timothy was born in the year 1724 in the village of Krotsk in the Novgorod diocese into the family of the cantor Sibelius Kirillov. A new family name Sokolov was given to him afterward by the head of the Novgorod seminary. His father died when Timothy was a young child, leaving the family in such poverty that his mother was barely able to make ends meet. She wanted to give him to be raised by a neighbor, a coachman, since there was nothing with which to feed the family, but his brother Peter would not permit this. Timothy often worked a whole day with the peasants for a single piece of black bread. As a 13-year-old boy, he was sent to a clergy school near the Novgorod Archbishop's home and earned his keep by working with vegetable gardeners. In 1740, he was accepted under a state grant set up for the Novgorod Seminary. The youth excelled at his studies. Upon finishing seminary in 1754, he became a teacher there, first in Greek and later in rhetoric and philosophy. In the year 1758, he was tonsured with the name Tikhon. In that same year, they appointed him to be prefect of the seminary. In 1759, they transferred him to Tver, elevating him to be archimandrite of the Zheltkov monastery. Later, they appointed him rector of the Tver seminary and, at the same time, head of the Otrok monastery. His election as bishop was providential. Metropolitan Demetrius, the presiding member of the Holy Synod, had intended to transfer the archimandrite to the Trinities Sergeyev Lavra. On the day of Pascha at Petersburg, Archimandrite Tikhon was one of the 8 candidates being considered for selection as vicar bishop of Novgorod. The lot fell on him 3 times. On the same day, during the Cherubikin, Bishop Athanasius of Tver, without realizing it, commemorated him as bishop while cutting out particles from the prospera on the table of oblation. On May 13, 1761, he was consecrated bishop of Exkolma and Ladoga. In 1763, St. Tikhon was transferred to the See of Rodnej. During the 4.5 years that he administered the Voronezh diocese, St. Tikhon provided constant edification both on his life and by his numerous pastoral guidances and soul-saving books. He wrote a whole series of works for pastors, and they're listed off, concerning the 7 holy mysteries, a supplement to the priestly office, concerning the mystery of repentance, an instruction concerning marriage. That's it. The saint considered it essential that each priest, deacon, and monk have a New Testament, and that he should read it daily. In an encyclical, he called on pastors to perform the holy mysteries with reverence, with fear of God and love for one's neighbor. An explanation of Christian duties was often republished in Moscow and Petersburg during the 18th century. At Voronezh, the saint eradicated an ancient pagan custom of celebrating in honor of Yarila, a pagan god associated with the fertility of grain and cattle. In the outlying districts where military units of Don Cossacks were dispersed, he formed a missionary commission to restore sectarians to the Orthodox Church. In 1765, St. Tikhon transformed the Voronezh Slavonic Latin school into a seminary. He invited experienced instructors from Kiev and Kharkov and planned the courses for it. He exerted much attention and effort to build up both the churches and the school and to guide pastors to understand the need for education. The saint was unflagging in his efforts to administer the vast diocese, and he often spent nights without sleep. In 1767, poor health compelled him to give up running the diocese and withdraw for rest to the
Toshevs.
monastery, at a distance 40 versts from Voronezh. In 1769, the saint transferred to the monastery of the Theotokos in the city of Zhdansk. Having settled into this monastery, St. Tikhon became a great teacher of the Christian life. With deep wisdom, he set forth the ideal of true monasticism in his rule of monastic living and his guidances to turn from the vanity of this world, and in his own life he fulfilled this ideal. He kept strictly to the precepts of the church. Zealously, almost daily, he visited the temple of God, and he often sang and read in the choir. In time, out of humility, he altogether ceased participating in serving, but merely stood in the altar, reverently making the sign of the cross over himself. He loved to read the lives of the saints and the works of the holy fathers. He knew the Psalter by heart, and he usually read or sang the Psalms on his journeys. The saint underwent much tribulation because he had to leave his flock. When he recovered his health, he thought about returning to the Novgorod diocese, where Metropolitan Gabriel had invited him to head the Ivaran Valias monastery. But when his cell attendant mentioned this to Elder Aaron, he declared, "Are you mad? The Mother of God is not directing him to move away from here." The cell attendant conveyed this to his grace. "If that is so," said the saint, "I shall not move away from here," and tore up the invitation. Sometimes he journeyed to the village of Rybovka, where he celebrated church services at the house. The saint journeyed also to the Tolshev monastery, which he loved for its solitude. The fruition of his spiritual life were the books that the saint wrote while in retirement: A Spiritual Treasury, Gathered from the World in 1770, and On True Christianity, 1776. The saint lived in very simple circumstances. He slept on straw, covered by a sheepskin coat. His senility was so great that he paid no attention to the workers who laughed at him as he walked about the monastery, pretending that he did not hear it. He used to say, "It is pleasing to God that even the monastery workers mock me, and I deserve it because of my sins." He often said, "Forgiveness is better than revenge." Once, a fool named Menev struck the saint on the cheek, saying, "Don't be so haughty." The saint, accepting this with gratitude, gave the fool 3 kopecks every day for the rest of his life. All his life, the saint, in troubles and sorrows and insults, joyfully endured, mindful that there can be no crown without the victory, nor victory without effort, nor effort without struggle, nor struggle without enemies. Strict towards himself, the saint was indulgent toward others. On the Friday before Palm Sunday, he entered the cell of his friend, the schema monk Metrophanes, and he saw him at the table together with Cosmas
Ignatievich.
of whom he was also fond. There was fish on the table, and his friends became upset. Fish is not permitted during Lent, except for feast days. And the saint said, "Sit down, for I know you. Love is higher than fasting." To further calm them, he ate some of their fish soup. Here. He especially loved the common folk and comforted them in their grievous lot, interceding with the landowners and moving them to compassion. He gave away his pension and gifts from environs to the poor. By his deeds of self-denial and love of soul, the saint advanced in the contemplation of heaven and foresaw the future. In 1778, he had a vision in his sleep. The Mother of God stood in the clouds, and near her were the apostles, Peter and Paul. On bended knees, the saint prayed to the all-pure Virgin for the peace of the whole world. The apostle Paul loudly exclaimed, "When they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction will come upon them." The saint fell asleep in trembling and in tears. The following year, he again saw the Mother of God in the air and several people near her. The saint knelt down, and near him 4 others in white garments also fell to their knees. The saint entreated the all-pure Virgin for someone, that she would not leave him. The saint did not tell Sultan who the 4 people were, nor for whom the request was made. She answered, "Let it be as you ask." Saint Tikhon prophesied much about the future, particularly the victory of Russia over the French in 1812. More than once, they saw the saint in spiritual rapture, with a transformed and luminous face, but he forbade them to speak about this. For 3 years before his repose, he prayed each day, "Tell me, O Lord, of my end." And a quiet voice in the morning dawn said, "It will be on Sunday." In that same year, he saw in a dream a beautiful meadow with wondrous palaces upon it. He wanted to go inside, but they said to him, "In 3 years you may enter. For now continue your labors." After this, the saint secluded himself in his cell and admitted only a few friends. Both clothing and a grave were prepared for the time of his death. He often came weeping over his coffin, while standing hidden from people in a closet. A year and 3 months before his death, in a vivid dream, it seemed to the saint that he was standing in the monastery church. A priest of his acquaintance was carrying the divine infant, covered with a veil, out of the altar through the royal doors. The saint approached and kissed the infant on the right cheek, and felt himself stricken on the left. Awakening, the saint sensed a numbness in his left cheek, his left leg, and a trembling in his left hand. He accepted this illness with joy. Shortly before his death, the saint saw in a dream a high and twisting ladder, and he heard a command to climb it. "At first I was afraid because of the weakness," he told his friend Cosmas. "But when I started to climb, the people standing around the ladder lifted me higher and higher, up to the very clouds." "The ladder," said Cosmas, "is the way to the heavenly kingdom. Those who helped were those you have helped by your advice, and they remember you." The saint said with tears, "I thought so too. I feel that my end is near." He frequently received the holy mysteries during his illness. Saint Tikhon died, as was revealed to him, on Sunday, August 13th, 1783, at the age of 59. The first uncovering of his relics occurred on May 14th, 1846. Saint Tikhon's glorification took place on Sunday, August 13th, 1861. When I was looking at different sources for his life, one of them described him as the victor over melancholy.
Mm-hmm.
That was very interesting.
What that means?
I guess basically being victorious over the feelings of like despair
Depression.
and depression.
Ah.
Yeah.
What about 3 copics? I didn't get the...
So I found there's actually a larger story I found on that. The man that struck him, he ended up paying 3 copics every day for the rest of his life.
He gave the guy who hit him 3 coins.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Let's see. What did I...
And the guy took it?
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
She was a beggar,
Ah.
Let's see. Where was
So you
it?
got 3 points every day?
every day.
Saint Tikhon.
Yes, there
They
we go.
gave him a stipend.
Wow.
So,
And he was paralyzed after he has the...
In a vision, so when it says he kissed the infant, he's talking about the mysteries, the gifts.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it says he kissed, and he saw the lamb as an infant, which would be Christ. He kissed him on the right cheek.
And then he woke up
Then
with
he
the...
was slapped on the left, or he felt and then he woke
Felt
up
it,
with the left
yes.
side paralyzed.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's what...
Which the world would say, oh yeah, he's got a stroke.
Hmm.
The left side of his face or his whole body?
Left side of his face,
And his
left
leg,
hand,
left
left
hand.
leg.
Yeah. Well, it'd be like
Did
this.
it stay that way?
Yeah,
Wow.
till he died.
That was what, a year and a half?
Shortly before.
It was that, or was it 3 years or something?
3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was this more detailed account of the slap that he received.
Mm-hmm.
There's this quote before it. "We are comforted and rejoice when a physician heals our feeble body. Even if he resorts to a bitter and cruel medicine, we thank him and give him retribution. All the more we should rejoice and thank God from the heart when he heals our spiritual weaknesses with sorrows and misfortunes." "You know that Kamenev, the fool for Christ's sake living in Zdansk, knew my thoughts," the saint once said. A few days before that, a demon had inflicted a state of certain haughtiness on me, and as hard as I tried to abandon it, it wouldn't go away. On the third day after Vespers, I was sitting in front of my cell, overwhelmed by these thoughts even more than before. Then I see Kamenev running from the church, surrounded by children. Passing the porch, he suddenly hits me on the cheek and says in my ear, "Don't be so arrogant." At that moment, I felt that demon of high-mindedness depart from me.
Oh, so this slapping didn't actually heal them.
It
Yes.
was, they'd been struggling with that particular sin.
There was another one in here. I can read real quick. It was interesting. What was it? Here we go. Here's the quote before it as well. A truly humble man cannot be grieved or aggravated by a reproach because he considered himself worthy of every humiliation. Interceding for the peasants who were mercilessly oppressed by one landowner, St. Tikhon was so harsh in his accusatory speech that his words provoked a backlash. The wayward landowner was so outraged with being equated with slaves that in a temper hit the saint. St. Tikhon turned around and left the house, but already on the way home, the Mother of God, to the Mother of God monastery, where the pensioned bishop labored in retirement, the saint realized that he himself had unwittingly become the culprit of what had happened by speaking in a wrong tone and using arguments inaccessible to the interlocutor. There we
the
go.
person he was talking to.
Immediately returning back, he fell at the feet of his offender, asking forgiveness for leading him into temptation. That impressed the landowner, and he himself burst into tears of repentance, seeing before him a living personification of what he sometimes heard about at Sunday's sermon. The nobleman bowed at the feet of the saint, begging to forgive him also. Since that time, the landowner has significantly changed his attitude toward the serfs, and no more complaints have been received.
Wow.
So, a couple thoughts. After he finished seminary, he's made teacher of Greek and rhetoric and philosophy.
Wow.
This is the young child who's working a whole day to get a single scrap of bread. What's that say about it?
Very smart.
Humility.
Well, it's more than just smart. It's the grace of God.
Grace.
Chosen by God. Did you pick up on his election as bishop? How'd that happen?
And one of the bishops had,
I'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, we thought that's how that happened.
No. He is one of 8 candidates. So there's 8 archimandrites or hieromonks that are being considered for consecration to bishop.
And his lot was drawn 3 times.
3
3
times.
times they drew his name.
So they must have been drawing the lots
They were drawing the
multiple
lots from,
times.
So
for all 8.
you don't
3 times.
normally hear about that, the drawing of lots for election to the episcopate. You hear about it for the election of the first hierarch of the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia. That's how they were chosen. They would write the name. They would nominate
They
3
usually
candidates, and
3
then they would,
candidates.
and actually Patriarch Tikhon was elected or selected by lot. Names written down on a scrap of paper, it's put in on the holy table, a molena is served, and then somebody pulls the name, one of the names out. In this case, he's chosen this way, so there's significance in that in his choosing. And then what you were talking about, what is the significance of this Archbishop Afanasi commemorating him as a bishop?
Was it some kind of a vision or, prophecy? He said he did it by accident.
Well, without realizing it.
Mm.
How are people commemorating in the liturgy? Something you probably don't know unless you've served.
Rank like priest Joseph.
By your rank.
Mm.
So a bishop is commemorated as bishop. Well, apparently he was commemorated as Bishop Tikhon instead of Archimandrite Tikhon. Priests are commemorated as priests, archpriests are commemorated as archpriests, monks are commemorated as monks, readers are commemorated as readers, they're clergy or ecclesiastical. And so, yeah, that was, again, providential.
So was somebody listening to that, and they reported it back to,
Well, I doubt that they would have corrected the Archbishop as he's doing the commemoration.
because I was
But
wondering how
somebody,
this found
it
out.
doesn't say in the life, but somebody said, must have said something to him
Yeah,
afterwards.
it'd be interesting. After he got done, somebody said,
How long was St. Tikhon ruling bishop in Rotherham?
I don't think it was very long. No.
Anybody want to suggest a number?
no.
Does the number 4 bring any significance?
Butterfly.
Since you said it.
4 years, 4.5 years, which is not a long time. There's a parallel here. Of course, he didn't die, but St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco was Archbishop of San Francisco in Western America from 1962 to 1966, 4 years. And yet, St. John is probably the most prominent bishop of San Francisco. And as far as I know, he's the only saint. Well, Tikhon was bishop in San Francisco until he moved to New York. So never mind. Then it also said that he ceased participating and serving, but merely stirred in the altar. This would be during the services. Why is he doing that? Why does he cease to participate? This is in the monastery.
Well, it's that he did it out of humility. Maybe he just
There's
wanted
other
to
ability, but what's
remove
going
himself
on?
from everybody else who is participating and just humbly observe.
Okay, so again, think back. How does a bishop serve in the liturgy? It's a hierarchical service. And the monastery he was in was not a big monastery. Didn't have a lot of priest monks. So he was also taking his turn serving as the serving priest. But more to the point, they didn't have all the servers who were trained to be able to handle hierarchical services. And so, this isn't in this life, but I read his life years ago. He petitioned the Holy Synod for permission to serve in priest's vestments, not hierarchical vestments, and serve as a priest. And so from that time on, he served as a priest, even though he was a bishop. But it took synodal authorization for him to do that. Why?
You're supposed to serve in the rank that you are.
You're supposed to serve in the rank you are. What makes you say that?
Sense.
Because it's true. You're going to stick with that.
I'm sick of that.
Yes, well, that's good because it is true.
Well, when you're ordained, you're ordained for a purpose.
Correct.
And your duty is to fulfill that purpose until you're permitted to do otherwise.
Correct.
If you're permitted.
So why did he leave his diocese?
I think she said he was sick.
The illness. Which is an interesting thing because several of the bishops were ill, and that's before and since. And they will be left as the ruling bishops of the diocese unless they transfer to somebody else. If they're sick, they're typically not transferred. And they'll maybe be a vicar bishop appointed, or maybe somebody other bishop will be invited in to take care of some things. But they don't normally remove the bishop from the diocese. Again, in this other life, Voronezh was out on the frontier. It was basically at the edge of the Caucasus. And it was really a wild place. It's like the Wild West. And what St. Tikhon found when he went there as a bishop was most of his clergy had low morals and did not serve well, and several couldn't even read, which is one of the reasons why he had all this stuff writing on the holy mysteries, the supplement to the priestly office, concerning the mystery of repentance, instruction concerning marriage, because some of his clergy were not in good state that way. I mean, he's dealing with a very low order of spirituality. And he got sick, but he also got somewhat discouraged and he wanted solitude, which is why he went off into these monasteries. It says that toward the end of his life, he's basically off by himself.
A lot of these saints wanted solitude.
Well, sure, because you can repent of your sins in solitude if you are.
I guess that he had like a nervous breakdown, which is why he left.
Well, that's how the world would look at it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can,
So-
can,
Mhm.
can Orthodox priests under a particular bishop, or can a bishop, I guess a bishop, could they just pack up their bags and go somewhere else? Because it seems like I've heard, reading the lives of some of the saints, that this saint was here and then he decided that he would move off and away he went. I'm used to in the Roman Church, it's all appointments by superiors.
That's a fact. And there are probably more canons in the ecumenical councils and the canons that are incorporated from the local councils, specifying that a bishop is not to leave his diocese. He's supposed to stay put. Same thing with a priest. A priest is ordained for a parish, but obviously needs come into effect. I've served in, I can't even remember how many different parishes. And mostly it's because, one thing or another, parish falls apart, some need comes, like, I was moved down here because of need. They needed a priest in Milanum. And so the bishop can move clergy around, and we do see bishops moving around. He was ordained as a vicar bishop for Novgorod, and then he was transferred to Voronezh because the Holy Synod needed a bishop there. So,
Yeah,
but
they're
it's,
transferred by somebody.
but they're not supposed to go off on their own. Now, a number of them will request to leave, to go to a monastery, for instance. And sometimes it's granted, sometimes it's not. But bishops are under obedience just like everybody else. I found this I meant to read this with St. Dimitri. There's this incident in the lives, he was compiling these lives.
Back to St. Dimitri.
St. Dimitri of Rostov. On an occasion, Orestes the martyr, St. Orestes the martyr, who's commemorated on November 10th, appeared to him just as St. Dimitri had finished writing the saint's life, and said, "I endured greater tortures for Christ than those you have written." Then he showed him his left side and said, "This was pierced with a red-hot iron." Then he showed him his left hand and said, "There I was slashed." Finally, he showed him his leg above the knee and said, "This was cut off by a scythe." When St. Dimitri wondered if this Orestes visiting him was one of the 5 companions, commemorated on December 13th, the saint discerned his thought and said, "I'm not one of the 5 companions, but rather the one whose life you have just written."
Get this right.
That's kind of encouraging, really. The saints.
Saints will come and correct me what you need.
Who were those? Sometime back we were reading the lives of these 3 martyrs.
I remember that.
And one of them
yes.
had flinched or something like that, and his
No, it was the 5 murders.
the 5 martyrs,
Yeah.
yeah, and when
Eugene, he grinned. You read it as it says.
yes,
You did not grin, you cringed.
so the saints do want the lives to be exact.
Well, and now I'm recalling something else we had talked about before, which is about I think we talked about it, about ghosts and how often, like, a lot of people nowadays are like, oh, you know, all of my loved ones are coming
Mhm.
back or whatever. So I was just thinking about how the saints do appear sometimes physically,
Yes.
sometimes they can interact,
But they're not ghosts.
but they're not ghosts. And I thought it would be interesting if you could just make a comment on
The church year is filled with accounts of various saints appearing to other saints and to people, just ordinary people. Typically in times of need, cities being attacked, people praying fervently, they'll very often see the Theotokos or one of the other saints. St. Michael's also one who comes and saves cities. Or, you know, things along those lines. But they appear to people who have faith. You have to have faith in God and in His saints for the saint to appear, because otherwise you're going to misunderstand it.
There's nothing like a ghost that haunts a building.
What,
No.
what I was going to say is, add to that, is that the ghosts that people think they're seeing, pretending to be your loved
Will
ones,
be demons.
will be
Yeah.
demons. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Especially if you haven't got a good ground.
Well, people with
faith.
no particular discernment are going to be fooled by demons, and the demons will take advantage of that.
So how do you know?
How do you know if you're being fooled?
You distrust every vision, and you pray to God, and you make the sign of the
Make the
cross.
sign of the cross, first
With,
of all.
with that desert father that saw the angel of light and said, I'm not worthy to go away from you.
Yeah, it was one. I don't.
Turned out it was the devil.
Yeah.
How did you know?
Not be
Because
scared
I'm not
of
worthy
the
of it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
the saint will understand if you're reluctant to believe in him because you're being cautious. They won't hold that against you.
Okay, the saints will come
Okay.
for a good reason.
For a good reason,
Why would the demons come?
for a bad reason.
To tempt you into worshiping a false god.
I think it was you were talking about, what was it? He was a stylite, was it
Simeon.
Saint Simeon? How I think he had a vision that like angels are coming to bring him up to heaven, and so he
He starts to
starts
step.
to step, yeah, and then he crosses himself and it disappears, and so
Mhm.
did he punish that foot for a whole year,
Mhm.
but not by standing on that,
Mhm.
just that one? Yeah.
Mhm. Saint Simeon style. Saint Spiridon.
Yes.
And what book is that?
We have,
Into your roast.
that's what you're talking about. Okay.
It's a long one.
Yeah,
Can you
Bridget.
abridge it?
Yeah. Okay, I'll just,
You want this?
okay.
And then you can add it, whatever you might have written on it.
There's undoubtedly some good episodes
Okay,
that St. Dimitri researched.
I wanna see if you has what I wanted to say. There was
Why would you
the
want?
Venetians were in control of the island,
Yes.
and there was
What island?
Corfu.
Corfu.
This is where his relics were.
Right.
And the ruler wanted to put an altar in the Orthodox Church so that he could hear mass in there. And the priests were all saying, that's not a good idea, the saint's not gonna be happy with this. And he just got upset, he was gonna do it anyway.
As they are wont to do.
Yeah. And Saint Spiridon appeared to him and threatened him. And he was terrified, but he went to a Roman Catholic theologian who told him, oh, those are just visions of the devil trying to dissuade you from doing a good work. So he goes, oh, okay. So he carried on. Then he had another vision. And he was still frightened by that vision. And then the theologian persuaded him, saying, if you have to ignore that, it's a work of the devil, and people won't have confidence in you if you don't follow through on this, on good work. So so they laid out all the materials, and they were going to go to work on this building, this structure, the very next day. and there was a guard outside, and St. Spiridon appeared holding a torch. And he came walking up, and the guy said, "Who goes there?" And there was no answer. He said, "Who goes there?" And he raises his muzzle. And St. Spiridion said, he identified himself, I'm spirited, and he grabbed the guard and threw him a long distance, but the guy landed on his feet and unharmed. And that was a detail that I saw only in one place. But that night, somehow they had all kinds of, what do they call that, the armory, you know what I mean? It blew up, and a huge portion of the compound that the Latins had caught on fire. A lot of people died. Part of the building came and trapped the ruler's head, you know what I mean, in a very specific way. It was, and then the theologian was found dead in the latrine, and
Like areas.
yeah, and then the ruler's ancestral home had a portrait of himself, and a storm blew up, and a lightning bolt came through the window and destroyed only that portrait, and nothing else was hurt. So they all took it as a bad home and don't mess with.
St. Spiridon.
So which Spiridon is it?
Trimithus, he was Archbishop of Crete.
When,
Is it, we have the icon?
400 something?
300. He was one of the fathers at the First Ecumenical Council.
Right.
Yes.
He is now in Corfu.
They took his remains. That was again a translation. I think I would say maybe in the life. I don't remember if it was the Venetians that moved him or the Orthodox.
I think it was a Greek monk, is what this says.
Okay.
Yeah, it was when the Saracens were
I
attacked.
was
Right.
in that place and I kissed his
Kisses,
coffin.
Mhm.
in Corfu.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and they they give you the little slippers,
Yep.
and I have those.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. So go ahead. And,
Slippers?
Because
I didn't
they
need
put
those.
they put slippers on him.
Right.
He's laying in that
Right.
box
on his feet.
on his feet and covered, and time's going on, and then they look, the slippers are worn.
Because he's
They
active.
take it, put new ones and cut and make so little ones like a souvenir give to people, and
It's a relic.
yeah, and they're supposed to help you,
Mm-hmm. He's a powerful saint.
and so just the material,
Yeah,
Yeah.
cotton,
that's interesting.
so cute. I need to show you. So yeah, it's pretty.
If I didn't get that, they gave a little piece of cotton with some of the oil.
Right.
And
Go
I
ahead.
had no idea about that place and about him, and we never heard about him. And then we were walking in the city, thinking, what place we should visit? Nothing here. And talking, and a woman going by, and it's Greece, not a Russian place. And the Russian woman talks in Russian. She says, "You should visit this place. There is Spiridon there."
Obviously, St.
Oh,
Spiridon
really?
wanted you to visit.
And we went there.
Yep.
There's
It's
many
like-
Russians there. There are multiple
A lot of
flights from
Russian, and the
Russia every
candles
day.
are
Yep.
Yeah.
so nice place.
Ah,
Read the life.
life.
Saint Spiridon of Trimithus was born towards the end of the 3rd century on the island of Cyprus. He was a shepherd and had a wife and children. He used all of his substance for the needs of his neighbors and homeless, for which the Lord rewarded him with the gift of wonder working. He healed those who were incurably sick and cast out demons. After the death of his wife during the reign of Constantine the Great, he was made Bishop of Trimithus, Cyprus. As a bishop, the saint did not alter his manner of life, but combined pastoral service with deeds of charity. According to the witness of the church historians, Saint Spiridon participated in the sessions of the First Ecumenical Council in the year 325. At the council, the saint entered into a dispute with a Greek philosopher who was defending the Arian heresy. The power of Saint Spiridon's plain, direct speech showed everyone the importance of God's wisdom before human wisdom. Listen, philosopher, to what I tell you. There is one God created man from dust. He has ordered all things, both visible and invisible, by his word and his spirit. The Word is the Son of God, who came down upon the earth on account of our sins. He was born of a virgin. He lived among men and suffered and died for our salvation. And when he arose from the dead, he has resurrected the human race with him. We believe he is one in essence, consubstantial with the Father, and equal to his authority and honor. We believe this without any sly rationalizations, for it is impossible to grasp this mystery by human reason. As a result of the discussion, the opponent of Christianity became the saint's zealous defender and later received holy baptism. After his conversion with Saint Spiridon, the philosopher turned to his companions and said, "Listen, until now my rivals have presented their arguments, and I was able to refute their proofs with other proofs. But instead of proofs from reason, the words of this elder are filled with some sort of special power, and no one can refute them, since it is impossible for man to oppose God. If any of you think as I do now, let him believe in Christ and join me in following this man. For God himself speaks through his lips." At this council, St. Spiridon displayed the unity of the Holy Trinity in a remarkable way. He took a brick in his hand and squeezed it. At that instant, fire shot up from it, and water dripped on the ground, and only dust remained in the hands of the wonder worker. There was only one brick, St. Spiridon said, but it was composed of three elements. The Holy Trinity. In the Holy Trinity, there are three persons, but only one God. The saint cared for his flock with great love, and through his prayers, drought was replaced by abundant rains, and incessant rains were replaced by fair weather. Through his prayers, the sick were healed and demons cast out. A woman once came up to him with a dead child in her arms, imploring the intercession of the saint. He prayed, and the infant was restored to life. The mother, overcome with joy, collapsed lifeless. Through the prayers of the saint of God, the mother was restored to life. Another time, hastening to save his friend who had been falsely accused and sentenced to death, the saint was hindered on his way and by the unanticipated flooding of a stream. The saint commanded the water, "Halt, for the Lord of all the world commands that you permit me to cross so that a man may be saved." The will of the saint was fulfilled, and he crossed over happily to the other shore. The judge, apprised of the miracle that had occurred, received St. Spiridon with esteem and set his friend free. Similar instances are known from the life of the saint. Once he went into an empty church and ordered that the lampadas and candles be lit, and he began service. When he said, "Peace be unto all," both he and the deacon heard from above the resounding of a great multitude of voices saying, "And with thy spirit." This choir was majestic and more sweetly melodious than any human choir. To each petition of the litanies, the invisible choir sang, "Lord have mercy." Attracted by the church singing, the people who lived nearby hastened toward it. As they got closer and closer to the church, the wondrous singing filled their ears and gladdened their hearts. But when they entered into the church, they saw no one but the bishop and several church servers, and they no longer heard the singing, which had greatly astonished them. St. Simeon Metaphrostes, November 9th, the author of this life, likened St. Spiridon to the patriarch Abraham in his hospitality. Sozomen, in his church history, offers an amazing example from the life of the saint on how he received strangers. One time at the start of the 40-day fast, a stranger knocked at his door, seeing that the traveler was very exhausted. And St. Spiridon said to his daughter, "Wash the feet of this man so that he may recline to dine." But since it was Lent, there was none of the necessary provisions, for the saint partook of food only on certain days, and on other days he went without food. His daughter replied that there was no bread or flour in the house. Then St. Spiridon apologized to his guest, ordered his daughter to cook the salted ham from their larder. After seeing the stranger at the table, he began to eat, urging that the man do the same. When the latter refused, calling himself a Christian, the saint rejoined, It is not proper to refuse this, for the word of God proclaims, unto the pure all things are pure. Another historical detail reported by Sozomen was characteristic of the saint. It was his custom to distribute one part of the gathering of harvest to the destitute and another portion to those having need while in debt. He did not take a portion for himself, but simply showed them the entrance to his storeroom, where each would take as much as he needed and could later pay it back in the same way without records or accounting. There is also a tale by Socrates Scholasticus about how robbers planned to steal the sheep of the saint. They broke into the sheepfold at night, but here they found themselves all tied up by some invisible power. When morning came, the saint went to his flock, and seeing the tied up robbers, he prayed and released them. For a long while, he advised them to lead their path of iniquity and earn their living by respectable work. Then he made a gift to them of a sheep, and sending them off said kindly, "Take this for your trouble, so that you do not spend your vigil at night in vain." All the lives of the saints speak of the amazing simplicity and gift of the wonder-working, and the gift of wonder-working granted him by God. Through a word of the saint, the dead were awakened, and the elements of nature tamed, and idols smashed. At one point, a council had been convened in Alexandria by the patriarch to discuss what to do about idols and the pagan temples there. Through the prayers of the fathers and the council, all the idols fell down except one, which was very much revered. It was revealed to the patriarch in a vision that this idol had to be shattered by Saint Spiridon and Trinithus. Invited by the council, the saint set sail on a ship, and at that moment the ship touched shore, and the saint stepped out on the land, and the idol in Alexandria and all its offerings turned to dust, which then was reported to the patriarch and all the bishops. Saint Spiridon lived his earthly life in righteousness and sanctity, and prayerfully surrendered his soul to the Lord. His relics repose on the island of Corfu, Kerkera, in a church named after him. His right hand, however, is located in Rome. His memory is also celebrated on Cheese Fair Saturday. He has many festivals because of all the miracles that he did.
Yeah, every one of those miracles, you get to the point of how do you get another day where it's commemorated. Every one of those miracles gets commemorated locally, and then some of them will become universal commemorations.
Yeah, they have multiple processions
Yeah.
in a year. And when they take his relics in procession,
They take that
they
forward.
take him sitting upright, not lying
Right.
down.
Interesting.
And even during World War II, he saved the area because the Germans tried to bomb. And the bombs came down and just went right out to sea.
Wow.
One more thing I wanted to mention about Tikhon. It was interesting when he had that dream with the Virgin Mary and
Mm-hmm.
Peter and Paul. What did he say exactly? It was,
Peace and safety.
when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction will befall them.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of reminds me of, well, today with everyone being like, oh, we have to be safe
Mhm.
above all else. Remember, that is not the highest thing to attain.
Well, how do we obtain peace and safety?
Through God.
Only
Yes.
through God.
Only through God.
It is through God's restraint that any place on earth is not at war and people are not at each other's throats, because the world is still in a fallen state. And the enemy of mankind does not do anything but cause strife. And so it's only by the grace of God calming things down that we receive peace. And that, was it you that was reading where he spoke harshly to the landowner
Mhm.
about the serfs?
Yeah.
That was St. Tikhon. I mean, even the saints fall prey to the passions from time to time.
There's a case, he thinks he's doing something righteous to help the,
But he does it in a way that is not righteous.
Right.
Which is why we have to be really careful
yes.
of our thoughts and of our words, even more so than of our deeds. Because the deeds are the ones that are most obvious. It's the thoughts and the words that invariably nail us.
Mm.
Anybody else have some thoughts that are, did you have something else to add with, on Saint Spiridon?
Oh, there was an interesting miracle that I know from the Greek life that's just described a little bit different.
Okay,
And that's when there was a landowner who had a lot of grain, and there was another time of hardship, and a poor man wanted to get some grain so he could grow crops, and the guy told him, "Sure, if you have money, but forget about it if you don't have any money." So from the Greek life, the guy went to St. Spiridon, and he produced this golden serpent. And, you know, he used that as surety for the loan to get the grain. So after the time of the crops coming back, I mean, you know, to pay the guy back, he goes and was able to pay, and so the landowner returned the golden serpent. And so the poor man went to St. Spiridon to give it back to him. And he takes it and he goes out in the garden and he goes, let's put it back to where I got it. And he puts it on the ground and it turns into
Back
a
into the
butterfly.
snake. There's numerous cases of him doing stuff like that, of helping out people.
Oh, he was a funny guy.
What's that?
He was a funny man.
Funny man.
Well, he wouldn't say he's funny, he was just straightforward, and the guy needs some money, I don't have any money, we'll grab the snake.
But he would grab a cat. But the snake is.
Well, the snake is lower than the cat, so it works better. And the saints are like that. But Saint Spiridon in particular
Yeah,
was
it's
rough in his. He was a peasant.
Yeah.
But he was always kind to everybody. All of these saints
Like Abraham.
were kind, hospitable, forgiving.
What is the Christian
Yeah,
rule?
right.
Yeah, but there were times he did call down judgment.
As well, he's a bishop first of all,
Yeah.
and secondly, in dealing with the instance where you were talking about the Venetians.
Yeah.
These were people who were blaspheming. Let's say our final prayer.
It is truly me to bless thee, the Theotokos, ever blessed and most blameless, and the Mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, and beyond compare more glorious than the seraphim. Thee who without corruption gavest birth to God the Word, the very Theotokos thee do we magnify.
One last item of business I forgot. Next week, we are not having a class because we have the feast day services on Tuesday. Then we have nativity the following week, we have a vigil. So it's going to be 3 weeks on the 12th of January when we have next meeting. It's 2 weeks from now. Metropolitan Peter of Moscow, who wants to prepare that life?
I'm gonna be gone, I'm gonna be at the coast. with
Okay.
Patricia.
Volunteer?
For Metropolitan Theater?
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. Bishop Mitrofan of Voronezh.
More on your game.
Another board
Yeah, well, you can do
I
him.
can do him.